Most people think success comes from one big opportunity. They couldn't be more wrong. For years, I was invisible. I worked the longest hours, took on the hardest projects, and watched other people get the recognition I thought I'd earned. More than once, I wondered if all the sacrifices were leading nowhere. But I made one decision that completely changed the direction of my career. It wasn't luck, it wasn't talent, and it definitely wasn't having the right connections. This is the true story of how years of quiet discipline, countless setbacks, and relentless hard work eventually opened a door I never imagined possible. And if you've ever felt like your efforts go unnoticed, don't skip this story, because the ending might change the way you think about success forever. My name is Henry, and if there's one thing I've learned by the age of 29, it's that success almost never arrives when you think you're ready for it. It usually comes after you've spent years doing work that nobody notices. People who meet me today assume my career moved quickly. They see the title, the office, the business trips, and the confidence I've built over the years. What they don't see are the mornings that started before sunrise, the weekends spent finishing projects everyone else had already forgotten, or the countless moments when quitting seemed like the most reasonable option. I wasn't born into a wealthy family, and I never had influential connections waiting to open doors for me. My parents worked hard, and while they always wanted me to succeed, they couldn't offer much more than encouragement. After high school, I realized that if I wanted a different future, I'd have to build it myself. At 18, I accepted the first job I could find. It wasn't glamorous. I spent my days organizing inventory for a regional distribution company, 8 hours of lifting boxes, updating spreadsheets, checking shipment numbers, and solving small problems that nobody outside the warehouse ever noticed. Most people treated it as a temporary stop. I treated it as training. Every evening after getting home exhausted, I opened my laptop and studied Excel, data analysis, business communication, basic project management. Sometimes I barely understood what I was reading, but I kept going because I believed that every new skill increased the chances of someone eventually giving me a better opportunity. The progress was painfully slow. 6 months passed. Nothing changed. A year passed. Still nothing. Meanwhile, many of my coworkers complained about management, low salaries, or bad luck. I understood their frustration, but complaining never seemed to solve anything. If I had enough energy left after work, I'd rather spend it learning something that might matter a year later. That mindset slowly changed how people viewed me. One afternoon, our operations manager, Victoria, stopped by my workstation. "I've noticed you always finish your reports before everyone else," she said. "I just like keeping things organized." She smiled. "Would you be interested in helping the planning department a few hours every week?" It wasn't a promotion. It wasn't extra pay. Most people would have said no. I accepted immediately. Those few hours changed everything. For the first time, I wasn't just moving products. I was seeing how decisions were made. Forecasts, supplier negotiations, transportation costs, production schedules. There was an entire world operating behind the scenes that I'd never noticed before. The work fascinated me. Soon I started arriving 30 minutes early just to review reports before everyone else came in. Victoria noticed. Then other managers noticed. Some evenings I'd leave the office after 10 hours, only to spend another 2 studying online courses. There were nights when I questioned whether any of it was worth it. My friends were traveling, going out on weekends, posting photos from concerts and vacations. I was watching tutorials about logistics software. Sometimes it felt ridiculous. But every few months, something small happened that reminded me I was moving forward. Someone asked for my opinion during a meeting. Someone trusted me with a larger task. Someone remembered my name. Those moments kept me going. About 2 years after joining the company, Victoria invited me into a conference room. "We're creating a junior operations analyst position," she said. I nodded politely, expecting her to ask whether I knew someone suitable. Instead, she slid a printed document across the table. "We'd like you to apply." It wasn't guaranteed. 3 internal candidates were competing for the same role. One of them had been with the company nearly 10 years. Another already had management experience elsewhere. Compared to them, I felt completely unqualified. For the next 3 weeks, I prepared harder than I had ever prepared for anything. I stayed late analyzing previous company reports. I practiced interview questions alone in my apartment. I rewrote my presentation so many times that I practically memorized every sentence. When interview day arrived, my hands were shaking. The panel included Victoria, the finance director, HR, and a senior executive I'd only seen from a distance. For 90 minutes they challenged every idea I presented. Why would this process improve efficiency? How would I measure success? What risks had I overlooked? By the time I walked out of the room, I was convinced I'd failed. 3 days passed. No email. 4 days. Nothing. On Friday afternoon, just as I was getting ready to leave, my phone rang. It was Victoria. "Henry," she said, "could you come upstairs for a minute?" Her voice revealed absolutely nothing. As I walked toward the executive floor, I kept telling myself not to expect good news. Sometimes the hardest part of building a career isn't working hard. It's waiting long enough for someone to finally notice. When I opened the conference room door, I saw 4 familiar faces already waiting for me. And the expression on Victoria's face told me this conversation was going to change far more than my job title. When I walked into the conference room, everyone was already seated. Victoria looked at me, smiled, and pointed toward the empty chair across from her. "Relax, Henry." That was the first sign I hadn't completely failed. The finance director folded his hands on the table. "We've reviewed every interview." A short pause followed. It wasn't even close. For a second, I wasn't sure what he meant. Victoria slid another document toward me. "Congratulations. The position is yours." I stared at the paper for several seconds before saying anything. After 2 years of working every overtime shift I could find, spending nights learning skills that nobody had asked me to learn, and constantly wondering whether any of it mattered, someone had finally noticed. It wasn't life-changing money. It wasn't some executive position. But it was the first promotion I had ever earned. That evening, I walked home instead of taking the bus. Not because I wanted the exercise. I simply needed time to process everything. For the first time in years, I felt like all those quiet mornings and late nights had actually been worth something. The new role was nothing like I expected. Instead of following instructions, I was now expected to improve processes. Instead of solving today's problems, I had to prevent next month's. It sounded exciting. In reality, it was overwhelming. During my first week, I attended more meetings than I had during my previous 2 years combined. People spoke quickly. Departments blamed each other whenever deadlines slipped. Managers expected answers immediately. Several times I left meetings convinced I'd said something stupid. I spent evenings replaying conversations in my head, wondering if everyone had already figured out I wasn't experienced enough for the job. Then one afternoon I made my first serious mistake. A reporting file contained outdated inventory numbers. I checked it twice, then a third time. Everything looked correct, so I approved it. Unfortunately, the source database hadn't synchronized properly overnight. Production schedules were built using incorrect information. Nothing catastrophic happened, but several deliveries had to be rearranged. The following morning, I was called into Victoria's office. I expected the conversation to last about 5 minutes, maybe less. Instead, she closed the door and asked me a simple question. "What happened?" I explained every step without trying to defend myself. When I finished, she nodded. "Good." I looked at her confused. "Good. You admitted the mistake immediately." She leaned back in her chair. "Henry, everyone here makes mistakes. What matters is whether they hide them." That conversation changed my perspective. Until then, I believed successful professionals never failed. Now I realize they simply learned faster than everyone else. Over the next several months, I focused on improving every weakness I could identify. I became better at presenting ideas, better at organizing meetings, better at explaining complicated information in simple language. Whenever someone from another department needed help with reports or planning, I volunteered. Not because I expected recognition, because every unfamiliar project taught me something. Eventually, people started coming directly to me instead of going through my manager. One of them was Dylan, a project coordinator from another division. Unlike most people in the office, Dylan asked difficult questions. He challenged assumptions. He looked for better ways to solve problems instead of repeating old routines. Working with him pushed me to think differently. Before long, We'd become the team people called whenever a complicated project started falling behind schedule. It wasn't always enjoyable. Sometimes we spent entire weeks solving issues created months earlier. Sometimes we stayed long after everyone else had gone home. But slowly our reputation grew. Near the end of my 3rd year, the company announced a major modernization project. Every department would be involved, millions of dollars, hundreds of employees, a timeline that most people privately believed was impossible. The executive team assembled a small planning group. When the list of names was published, mine was there. So was Dylan's. The pressure increased immediately. For 6 months my routine barely changed. Wake up, go to work, attend meetings, analyze reports, go home, study, sleep, repeat. There were weeks when I forgot what day it was. Some evenings I looked around the nearly empty office and wondered if I was sacrificing too much for a career. Still, every completed milestone reminded me why I had started this journey. Not because I wanted a bigger title, because I wanted to become someone capable of solving problems that once seemed impossible. Halfway through the project, another unexpected opportunity appeared. Our executive director announced that one member of the planning group would travel to the company's European headquarters to present the project's progress. It would be the first international business trip of my career. 5 candidates were being considered. Nobody knew who would be chosen. A week later, Victoria stopped by my desk. "Henry," she said quietly, "the executive board wants to see you tomorrow morning." I looked up from my laptop. "Is something wrong?" She smiled. "I think you're about to find out why all those late nights finally mattered." The executive board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock. I barely slept the night before. Not because I thought I was in trouble, but because I knew meetings at that level rarely happen without a reason. I arrived at the office 40 minutes early, grabbed a coffee, reviewed my notes one last time and tried to calm my thoughts. At exactly 9, the assistant opened the conference room door. "They're ready for you." The room was larger than any meeting space I'd worked in before. Around the table sat the chief operations officer, the finance director, Victoria, 2 regional managers, and Allison, the vice president responsible for strategic development. She began the conversation. "Henry, we've been reviewing the modernization project for the past several months." I nodded. "The reports from every department have been remarkably consistent." Another pause. "Your name keeps coming up." I wasn't sure how to respond. "We're impressed with the way you've handled pressure," Allison continued. "When deadlines became unrealistic, you didn't complain. You reorganized the workflow. When departments disagreed, you focused on finding solutions instead of assigning blame." She looked directly at me. "That's difficult to teach." For the next 30 minutes, they asked about the project, future improvements, and where I believed the company could become more efficient over the next 5 years. This time I wasn't nervous. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I simply explained everything I'd learned from working on the warehouse floor, planning department, and operations team. When the meeting ended, Allison stood up. "We'd like you to represent the company in Amsterdam next month." For a second, I thought I'd misunderstood. "The European leadership team wants an update on the project, and we'd like you to give the presentation." I thanked everyone, shook their hands, and somehow made it back to my desk before reality finally caught up with me. My first international business trip. 3 years earlier, I'd been counting inventory in a warehouse. Now I was preparing to present our work to senior executives from several countries. The following weeks became the busiest of my career. Every chart had to be accurate. Every projection needed supporting data. Every possible question required an answer. Dylan helped review every presentation draft. "If they ask about production efficiency," he said one evening, "don't just show percentages. Tell them why the numbers changed." He was right. Data explained what happened. Stories explained why it mattered. By the time we boarded the flight, I had rehearsed the presentation more than 50 times. Amsterdam exceeded every expectation. Not because of the city itself, although it was beautiful, but because of the people I met. Professionals from Germany, France, Sweden, Italy, and the Netherlands all approached the same challenges differently. Some focused on automation. Others emphasized communication. A few believed culture mattered more than technology. For the first time, I realized there wasn't one correct way to build a successful business. The best organizations borrowed good ideas from everywhere. The presentation lasted just under an hour. The questions continued for another 45 minutes. When it finished, Allison quietly leaned over. "You looked like you've been doing this for years." I laughed. "I've been practicing for weeks." It showed. That trip changed more than my confidence. Changed my ambition. When I returned home, I no longer wanted to simply perform well in my current role. I wanted to become someone capable of leading larger teams, managing bigger projects, and helping companies solve problems that affected thousands of people instead of dozens. That goal required another level of discipline, so I built a new routine. I started reading leadership books during my morning commute. I completed advanced certifications on weekends. I volunteered for cross-functional projects that most people avoided because they required extra hours. Some coworkers questioned why I kept taking on additional responsibilities. "Aren't you already busy enough?" one asked. Probably. But I had learned something important. Growth almost always feels inconvenient while it's happening. About a year later, the modernization project officially ended. The results exceeded every target. Operating costs dropped. Delivery times improved. Customer satisfaction reached the highest level the company had recorded in years. During the closing meeting, Allison addressed everyone involved. This project succeeded because people were willing to do difficult work without expecting immediate recognition. Then she looked toward me. "Henry, could you stay for a few minutes after everyone leaves?" The room slowly emptied until only the two of us remained. She placed a folder on the table. "We're opening a new strategic operations division." I listened carefully. "We need someone to build it from the ground up." She pushed the folder toward me. "I'd like you to become its first manager." I looked at the documents. The opportunity was bigger than anything I had imagined. Better salary, a larger team, direct communication with senior leadership. But there was one condition. Accepting the role would mean leaving behind everything I had built over the previous 4 years and starting almost from zero again. As exciting as the offer sounded, I knew one decision could completely change the direction of my career. And this time, working hard alone wouldn't be enough. I took the folder home that evening. For the first time in years, I didn't open my laptop after dinner. I simply sat by the window with a notebook, listing every advantage and every risk. The promotion was everything I had worked toward. It also meant stepping into a role where there would be no detailed instructions, no proven system to follow, and no experienced manager sitting nearby to answer difficult questions. If I accepted, every important decision would be mine. The following morning, I walked into Allison's office. "I'll do it." She smiled, almost as if she'd expected that answer from the beginning. "I was hoping you'd say yes." The transition wasn't easy. Building a department from scratch sounded exciting during interviews. In reality, it meant months of uncertainty. There were no established procedures, no experienced team waiting for me, no roadmap. The first responsibility was hiring people. Instead of looking only at resumes, I paid attention to something else. Curiosity. Technical skills could be learned. A willingness to improve was much harder to teach. After dozens of interviews, I hired a small team. Among them were Max, a talented business analyst who loved solving complicated problems, Fiona, an experienced project coordinator with exceptional organizational skills, and Alessandra, whose background in process improvement immediately impressed everyone she met. None of us had worked together before. We came from different departments, different industries, and different professional backgrounds. First, everything felt chaotic. Simple tasks took twice as long because we were still learning how each person approached work. Deadlines slipped. Meetings lasted forever. Some ideas that looked brilliant on paper completely failed once we tried implementing them. Instead of searching for someone to blame, we focused on understanding why things weren't working. Every Friday afternoon, we reviewed the entire week. What succeeded? What failed? What should never be repeated? Those conversations became the foundation of our department. Within 6 months, the atmosphere changed. People trusted each other. Communication became faster. Projects moved more efficiently. Executives started assigning us increasingly difficult assignments because they knew we wouldn't stop after finding the first obstacle. One Monday morning, Allison called me unexpectedly. "We've just signed a contract with our largest client." I congratulated her. She smiled. "You'll be leading the implementation." The project was unlike anything we'd handled before. Several offices, hundreds of employees, a demanding timeline. Failure wasn't really an option. For nearly 5 months, my calendar was completely full. Early planning sessions, client workshops, budget reviews, progress meetings, evenings spent refining presentations before the next day's discussions. Some nights I didn't leave the office until security began turning lights off floor by floor. There were moments when exhaustion made every decision feel twice as difficult. Whenever that happened, I reminded myself why I had started this journey years earlier. Not to collect impressive job titles. Not to compete with anyone else. Simply to become better than the person I had been yesterday. That mindset helped more than any productivity system ever could. As the deadline approached, pressure increased. Unexpected technical issues delayed several important milestones. The client became frustrated. Senior leadership wanted daily updates. During one particularly difficult meeting, silence filled the conference room after another supplier announced additional delays. Everyone waited for someone else to speak. Finally, I stood up. "We're looking at the problem from the wrong direction." Every head turned toward me. "We can't control what has already happened." I pointed toward the project timeline displayed on the screen. "But we can redesign everything that happens next." For the next 2 hours, our entire team rebuilt the implementation plan. It wasn't easy. Several people volunteered to work additional hours. Others rearranged priorities to support critical tasks. Nobody complained. Everyone focused on moving forward. 3 weeks later, we completed the project. On schedule. Within budget. The client later described it as one of the smoothest large-scale implementations they had experienced. That success changed our department's reputation overnight. Requests for our support doubled. Executives began involving us in long-term strategic planning instead of only operational improvements. One afternoon, nearly 7 years after I'd started my career moving inventory inside a warehouse, Allison invited me into her office once again. She closed the door and handed me a familiar-looking folder. "I think you've outgrown this position." I laughed. "I've only just started feeling comfortable." "Exactly," she replied. "The best time to grow is when your current challenges no longer scare you." Inside the folder was an offer to become Director of Strategic Operations. It wasn't simply another promotion. It meant helping shape the company's future alongside the executive leadership team. I signed the agreement later that week. That evening, I stayed in the office long after everyone had gone home. The building was completely silent. I walked through the departments where I'd spent nearly a decade learning, making mistakes, solving problems, and slowly earning people's trust. Success hadn't arrived overnight. It had been built through thousands of ordinary days. Early mornings, late evenings, failed ideas, small improvements, patient mentors, reliable teammates, consistent effort. Looking back, I realized that none of the promotions had truly changed my life. The habits had. Careers aren't built during the biggest moments. They're built during the quiet days when nobody is watching, when progress feels invisible, and when the easiest decision would be to stop trying. I'm still learning. I'm still making mistakes. There are still projects that don't go as planned and challenges that seem impossible at first. But now I know something I couldn't have understood at 18. Talent might open a door. Luck might create an opportunity. But discipline, the quiet decision to keep improving long after the excitement disappears, is what keeps that door open. And if my journey has taught me anything, it's this. The most rewarding careers aren't built by chasing success. They're built by becoming the kind of person success eventually has no choice but to find.